Good morning. This is Ellen calling in from the beautiful island of St. Bart's, and you are listening to Light Talk.
And this is David coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brother
and Sister.
That's right, Ellen. Welcome to episode 381. And unfortunately, Steve can't be here because he had some computer problems. So it's just going to be Ellen and me. I guess we're the brother and sister of the day.
There we go.
And first, I would like to thank Ellen, Steve, and Brackley, along with guests Dennis Size, Jeff Ravitz, and John Gresh for their wonderful tribute to Bill Klages. For those who have not heard it, check out Light Talk episode 380. That was just last week. It was just wonderful to hear those stories and testimonials. And it's good to be back, by the way. I've been gone for a couple of weeks. I was doing Carmen in Santa Barbara, and that was a lot of fun with a really cool group of people at the Music Academy of the West. And let me tell you, there are worse places to be in the summer than 2 weeks in Santa Barbara. I'll tell you that right now. But it's good to be back. Guess what? Yesterday was my 69th birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Isn't that crazy? Thank you, Nick. Nick's applauding there.
I am too.
Well, thank you, Bryan, as well. That's excellent. 69 years old. Oh, my God. That's 1 year from 70. Anyway, it's good to be there. But hey, listen, it's good to be back because today we have not one, but two distinguished guests. So, Ellen, please tell our listeners who we have on deck today.
I'd be happy to. First up is Bryan MacDevitt, a lighting designer and educator who has worked extensively on Broadway and off-Broadway, as well as touring, regional theater, and industrial productions. He won the Tony Award for Best Lighting Design for his work on the 2002 Broadway revival of Into the Woods, and additional Tonys for plays in 2005 for The Pillow Man, 2007 for The Coast of Utopia Part 1 Voyage, 2009 for Joe Turner's Come and Gone, and the Tony Award for Best Lighting Design in a Musical twice, 2011 for Book of Mormon, and this year again for The Outsiders. Bryan attended SUNY Purchase, graduated with a degree in lighting design, and in the fall of 2009, the tables turned and he began working as an associate professor of lighting design at the University of Maryland in College Park. And our second guest is Nick Solyum, who works as a lighting designer and associate designer on and off Broadway. When starting out, he assisted Ken Posner on a range of shows and has recently served as associate lighting designer with Bryan MacDevitt on The Music Man and The Outsiders. Numerous additional Broadway associate lighting design credits include Harry Potter and the Cursed Child with Neil Austin, Moulin Rouge the Musical with Justin Townsend, and Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812 with Bradley King. Nick got his master's degree at NYU, an undergrad degree at the University of California, Long Beach, where one of his professors was Light Talk's own David Martin Jacques.
Hi, David.
Hey, Nick.
Hi,
Good to see you again.
Welcome aboard, guys.
Good to see you
Nick,
again.
I'm not changing that grade. I've told you for 30 years. I'm not going to change that grade, man. What can I tell you?
If I didn't make it through from 2006 with lighting design with David, and here I am.
Right.
Here
I
you
made
are.
it through.
It's amazing that he's successful. I mean, really. I mean, could you imagine? You'd have 3 Tonys by now had you gone to someplace else. I mean, come on.
I have a quick question.
All right,
I have
Bryan.
a quick question for Nick. Nick, all those shows in your credits just named, did they all win Tony Awards?
I've
For
got
lighting?
4. I've got the Natasha
good
Pierre
record.
as an
So-
associate.
Yeah.
Moulin Rouge, Harry Potter, Outsiders.
There you go.
That's a good record.
Yeah, Bryan, I think you've only done like 79 Broadway shows. And how many Tonys have you won?
Only 6.
Yeah, you see, I mean...
I'm way behind. I said to Natasha, I was like, I'm never going to catch up to you. And then I actually, went online and looked, and I was like, oh, it's not that far.
That's not bad.
And I thought
Right.
nobody was close to Jules, but Natasha's going to catch Jules. I think.
Right.
That's awesome.
Has Jules retired altogether?
No, he's doing Gypsy
Oh.
this next season. Gypsy with Audra. I'm pretty sure it's Audra. Kenny Leon's directing, and I'm pretty sure it's Audra playing Mother.
Yes, I think you're correct.
That's going to kick ass, yeah.
So, how do you guys work together? What is your process for? We've got the hint that Bryan is extremely visual and artistic, and Nick is like the technical side of things. So, what is your process for when you guys when you always take Nick with you when you walk in the theater and say, "Okay, what do I need gear wise?" Or how does it start?
But before you say anything, it's obvious they work together because they're wearing the same shirt.
I know.
I just noticed that. We're wearing a uniform. Let's go with the maroon.
They're both maroon today. It's awesome. That's excellent.
Except I think Nick has a Soch collar and I have a greaser collar. Do you have a collar?
I do. I have a polo. Yeah, it's a polo too.
You both look great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, Bryan and I have done a few shows together now. The first was Waverly Gallery, which was a play. And I was recommended to him as a new person to work with. And as with a new designer, we sort of like start from a blank page, like the how do you want to work is a big part of the conversation. And we have this sort of like method where we zoom and look at the plot together and work out a needs list. Bryan and I will look at the set drawings. And in this case, we had a laser scan of the venue, so I imported it all into 3D. So we did not even need to go to the theater together, Ellen. We could just pull it up on Vectorworks and look at all of the positions in the front of house and on stage. And it just worked from a needs list into a light plot, sort of like together on Zoom over the course of a few meetings. Would you describe that the same way, Bryan?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, when I tell people this story, I was like, normally I would spend 3 days doing a rough plot and then hand a rough plot to someone who knows how to draft. And I feel like we did it in an afternoon, at least in terms of the body, the workhorse of the plot. But also it's the gear, I'm educated by him, by Nick, but also by David Arch, because David and Arch and I have been worked together since Into the Woods. So, and everything I was doing back in the day was incandescent. And, like incandescent lamps were my bread and butter because I love the color temperature. I love how the lamps behave. And it's also what I grew up with. So it was like my palette.
But to tee you up, Bryan, that was really important for you from our very first conversation about The Outsiders.
Yeah, because it's an old school, everything about the show is like old school storytelling. And it was some point during the process, I was like, oh shit, I get it. We're doing Shakespeare. We're like doing Shakespeare 1970s, 1960s. So everything really wanted to lean into incandescent and naturalism. And these guys helped me find the lamps that could actually do that. Because I've always struggled with, even before LED, struggled with, I would say gas lamps, but they're not gas lamps. But,
the gas lamps.
And, looking, it's
You're
just
not that old. My God.
Not gas lamps. Arc lamps.
Right. Okay. Right.
But they have gas in them.
They do.
They,
you're
inside?
Right. I stand corrected.
That's okay.
No, it's just that David is old enough to remember the old real gas lamps.
I've burned down many a theater.
Dude, I'm hot on your trail. I'm right behind you. But so you understand, making that transition to Very Lights and putting lights that did not look nice on human beings.
Right.
Like what that struggle is like. The lamps could do a lot of things. So basically, those lamps would be designated to light scenery, and I would have a whole array of lamps that were designated to light humans.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did you end up with in the rig for The Outsiders?
Well, we did a test at our supplier PRG where we looked at the Halcyon Titanium versus the 3600 from Verilight, Halcyon being from ETC. And we, correct me if you can always interrupt me, Bryan, but we went with the Halcyon. if my memory was that the CTO we preferred on the Halcyon a lot more than on the 3600. The CTO flag itself.
Yeah. And part of our big project was, the color gold is mentioned a lot in the piece. So gold was very important to get like a sunset gold and get a rich gold and get incandescent without losing too much intensity. Because a lot of lamps you could mix to the perfect color and you end up with a third or even less of the amount of output.
Right.
So that was really important to us. Also in the skylights, but meaning the cyc lights. But yeah, and I think because David and I, the shows that we did, like I think, like for instance, like Book of Mormon, it was the VL 3500s, which were the workhorse, which was fitting for that show because it wasn't natural. So we had a color that we mixed called Mormon pink, and we had a color mix for Africa. We had a color mix for Salt Lake City and for any of the Mormon members. And then what was lighting the scenery, I think it was the old Mac 700s.
Oh, Mac 700s. Okay.
Because they did great patterns, did great movement, but you didn't want to put them on a person's face. So it's so there was always a separation between what we did did scenically and what we did on people.
That's always the case though nowadays, isn't it? Though when we're dealing with fixtures, we have to think about people versus scenery or effects all the time now, because we're still in a transition mode. I just did a show, this Carmen I did, I only had 6 moving lights. And there were like 6 LED fixtures. They were inexpensive because they didn't have a lot of money, but everything else was incandescent. And I haven't done an incandescent show in years. And I must tell you, I kind of loved it because I was able to get those flesh tones. And you're right, Bryan, that gold would be almost impossible to get with LED.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think also there was something, I remember like moaning about this with Jim Ingalls back in the day about lamps. And we kind of decided if it doesn't produce heat, it doesn't look right. Like if you don't feel the heat of the lamp on your body, which is, it's great for the performers that the stages aren't cooking anymore. I actually did a one-off for Pepsi when I worked for Fiorentino a little bit. And I lit Ray Charles. And I always like to tell people that I got notes from a blind man. He was like sitting at the piano and he'd turn around and be like, that lamp right there. And he'd point like right at, a kick-ass par can right on the back of his head. He was like, take it down, take it down, take it down, take it down. There were a number, like he'd play a little bit more, then he'd stop and he'd say, hey, light man, this one over here.
Take it down.
Take it down, take it down.
That's pretty funny.
But that was, that's what pars did. And that's
right.
Also what made them beautiful.
Yeah.
I do think that those really warm wavelengths are hard to find in LED fixtures. We can see them in the Luster 3 with the deep red that we can look at skin tone with the deep red emitter and it makes a human look alive. And compared to things without that deep red wavelength.
Oh.
So the moving lights just are working with cold white source engines, and so we're just not getting those deep red wavelengths without filtering out so much of the light. And it was the same with the arc lamps before. But one of the ways, Bryan, you and I approached this was on the Music Man. We had encore warms for the people.
Yeah, we had a whole army of those.
An entire system of encore warms where you're starting from a warm white engine so that you can get those warm wavelengths on people.
And I remember the first day when we focused all them to, that quote unquote areas across. There was like 7 across and 5 deep or even 7 deep. So it's a huge stage. And while you were focusing them, I was like, hey, are those things at full? And you and Dave were like, yep.
Yep.
Because that's not what we're used to anymore,
I wanted to go back in history for a minute to one of my favorite things you lit, which was Utopia at Lincoln Center. And if I recall, you and Natasha and someone else all won Tonys.
Kenny.
Yeah. How did that,
Kenny,
what was that story?
Well, it was 3 parts. I think it was like each play was close to 4 hours.
Right.
It's Tom Stoppard.
Yes.
So it was like, he's got a lot of words. And they asked each one of us, well, does anybody want to do this project? And we were like, I can't afford, everybody had a family. I can't afford to do a Lort show from September to March, because each chunk of it was going to be 6 or 8 weeks. And then they came back and said, how do you feel about splitting it up 3 ways? And that rig was ridiculous because everybody had their wish list, and Lincoln Center is probably out of school, but they have money to spend on scenery as opposed to money to spend on associates and assistants and fees. But as Rocco said, there's no profit like nonprofit. But yeah, I mean, we had this incredible rig, and actually it was amazing because I got stuck at one point about like, what am I going to do? I got to light this scrim. I don't have anything. I didn't plan on anything, and blah, blah, blah. But Kenny had hung something, like strip lights right behind it, and we turned them on. I was like, oh my God, it was just beautiful. Something I didn't plan at all. And it backlit the scrim. The deck was all glass. It was all black mirrored floor. So it was a kind of thing like that was Bob Crowley's set and Scott Pass's set. You couldn't really mess that up. You could pretty much, and the costumes were lush. They did the costumes also. And so you just put a person on a black mirror in a period costume, and it'd be really hard not to make it, not to be beautiful.
That is a secret. It's a great one.
I mean, that's what I felt. That's what I felt about Outsiders too. Yeah. I mean, when I first, we were looking at the model, and I was like, oh my God, like I was salivating, like, let me at it.
It's funny, Bryan, because you're an educator as well. And, my students have always said, oh my God, it's a very shiny floor. What am I going to do? It's a mirrored floor. I said, are you kidding me? Rejoice. It could be the most beautiful lighting effects you could ever have. I mean, it goes way back to Theron when she was talking about lighting the floor and composing the floor. But, when you have that reflection, it's, I've lit tons of mirrored floors. And every show looked fantastic. You just have to be a little careful. You just have
to figure out,
right?
You have to figure out where it goes after about, like, this is where misspent youth in a pool hall comes in handy. Angle of incidence. Where you're doing a bank shot.
You knew your angles, man.
No, I didn't. I'm kidding.
Oh, okay.
I'm a terrible pool player.
I thought you were a music man. Anyway.
Coast of Utopia's associate lighting designer, Aaron Spivey, who kept all 3 of you together.
Yeah, my God, Aaron.
And Aaron, I learned a lot from Aaron as he was the associate on Catch Me If You Can when I was observing that for the very first time, observing Focus on a Broadway stage for the very first time. It was an Aaron Spivey associate show with Ken Posner.
So, Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about your educational journey going from Long Beach to NYU and how it supported your journey into the profession?
Yes. So I grew up in Burbank and stayed close to my home in Long Beach. And we could, Bryan, we would have parties on the beach for rap parties where we would take the scenery pieces to
fun.
The bonfires. That's what
Huntington Beach
college. Yes, that's what college rap parties were like. And I was working a little bit around LA, and I was a musical theater kid growing up. My mom took me to Peter Pan at the Pantages and had cranked Les Mis on the car and Phantom of the Opera. And I was seeing things all around, and everything was out of New York for musicals. And so I thought I could help make the coast change and increase my education by applying to grad schools on the East Coast. So from '07 to 2010, I went to NYU and studied under Robert Rizal, M.L. Geiger, Alan Lee Hughes. And after that amazing education of 3 years just sitting in a classroom and arguing about plays and light, and took drafting from John McKernan himself, and graduated in 2010. And that NYU allowed me to move coasts, really, with a little bit of a support system rather than just an airplane flight to New York City. And some of my best friends to this day I met in my class at NYU, and Bradley King, who was one of my dearest friends, Brett Benakis, who we worked with on The Outsiders in the set design collaborative called AMP on this show. And so like it was a fantastic way for me to make the coast shift, but also quite an expensive one, shall we say. Yeah. I will be paying that on my program till I'm 51 years old. So we'll see. Yeah.
I've had students though ask me, what is the difference between being an assistant lighting designer and an associate lighting designer? And could you tell us a little bit about that transition that you made from grad school into, the profession?
Sure. So I sort of approached a lot of things with the requirement that I needed to pay my rent and my groceries.
The practical route.
I know. Some folks that's not the case for reasons for one way or the other. But when, for instance, it's always burned into my mind that I designed a show at a small off-Broadway theater for $250 out of grad school. And after I did that show, I was like, I don't think that covered my sandwiches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it did not cover my sandwiches. You got to save 30% for a 1099 taxes. And so I was into the situation where I had to make some choices based off of where I could make a living using my lighting skills. And on top of that, working as an assistant allowed for opportunities to work on really big, fun shows. And so I will always be grateful to Ken Posner, whom I worked with for nearly 4 years straight, working regionally and off-Broadway and at Williamstown, and then a play on Broadway, and then an assistant on Broadway, and moving a very methodical, learned method of bringing a new person up to speed. And he was a wonderful mentor out of grad school, a professional mentor and collaborator out of grad school that started with a musical called Death Takes a Holiday, which was an off-Broadway musical. And so to answer your question, that was about my transition from professional life from educational. But to answer your question about the definition, so there's no contractual difference between an associate and an assistant. There is just a sort of accepted difference in the jobs. An associate, I usually think of it as someone who is trusted to speak with the designer's voice, and that is the difference between an associate and an assistant, as in a conceptual level. And in a practical level, on the very niche world of Broadway, an assistant is typically given the task of calling the follow spots and designing the follow spot track on a musical. And they're employed to do that job from the start of focus to when we freeze the show. And the associate is brought on during prep to prep the set electrics and the light plot and the bid negotiations, and being a part of the design conversations, and then be in the theater from load in until opening night. So that's my brief description of the difference between an assistant and an associate.
On The Outsiders, Nick was literally the hub, I think, of the whole design team, because of the amount of stuff that had to be synced up in MIDI. That's probably not the right term, right, Nick? But everybody turned to Nick. Like, he was the point person for how sound and light and video integrated, and scenic things as well, you know, that, so it was, he really was like the pilot. And I was like, I was kind of like the nagging passenger in the back saying, like, it's too cold back here. It's too warm. And Nick would take care of that. He would get the passenger in the back to shut up. But really, Nick, I
typically like to think of it as like a chief of staff position, where a lot of the information flows in and out of me, and I'm your point person, but I'm also the fellow associate's point person for the lighting. So information in and out of the lighting department, I like to come through me so I can hold the whole picture of everything in my mind. But that turns out, in reality, that turns out with me giving a lot of bad news to Bryan. Sometimes my job feels like the bad news department. Like, oh, we didn't get to this work note today. We were blocked by a ladder from someone else's department. You know, but that, you know, that's part of the job, is the being the having to deliver the things we didn't get to. But I want to mention, before we move off the assistant, that we had a fantastic assistant, Katie Atwell, who called spots on The Outsiders, whom I work with on Moulin Rouge, and she has done many of the Moulin Rouges, including Broadway and the U.S. tour, and even some of the internationals in Asia, in Korea, and Japan. So Katie is a wonderful designer and friend and person. I was so thankful to have her at the table with us as well.
Right. And even she filled in for Nick towards the end. He had another appointment somewhere, and she stepped into his shoes gracefully. And also, she wasn't so kind giving me bad news.
Oh.
No, that's not true.
You know, it's interesting because I was going to ask, just to follow up a little bit, Nick, of when you make that jump from being an assistant to an associate and how that works. I mean, I could just talk from a designer's point of view, and I'm sure Bryan would probably agree with me, is that when you find an assistant who you can trust, who has a good eye, who you can totally trust, yeah, and they're not trying to take over the show, right? Because they know what their job is. That's you hold on to them like gold. You know, it's like these people are really precious, because you will have a chance to be a designer. I mean, this is just the way it works, and that's something that Gilbert taught me when I was assisting him.
Oh yeah,
this is how you do it. You work with the designer's eye, and I was really good at that. I was able to recreate what Gilbert could do, and I would know what he would say when a situation would come up and how he would do it in his style. The same thing with Neil Giampoulos when I was his associate. So that is a talent that young designers need to learn. It's about letting go of your ego and being able to be a good translator and come up with creative ideas in the designer's style. That's a very rare thing to be able to do. And obviously you do it really well.
Yeah, very well. I have to say, what it's become for me is, because is this the second show we did together with David, Music Man, and then this? And
yes.
I realized that when I make a command, I no longer make commands with them. Like when I would say, can I have fixture such and such and such, I would be met with some polite silence. I knew that what I was asking to do is like pull out a Jenga block, like somewhere near the bottom. And then I realized, like, okay, because especially with David, he'd be like, well, he wouldn't even say, well, it would just be silence. And I'd know, like, okay, I need light from around this angle on the side of this guy's face in this color. What do you got? You know, because any of the intricacies, they took care of. So I could just be like, you know, hand me a paintbrush, dab it in there and I'll refine it, but most of the time they're both great designers. So
yeah, we found a groove when you would be able to mention things like, give me a dappled light from stage right and a not dappled light from stage left, for instance, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then we get it in place, and then we could refine it and then update it and go from there.
Yeah. I think we were also lucky on this show that we had a director who knew as much about shadow as she did about light. And I think that's always a pitfall. Or, actually, it was one of the things I said to her in the first interview. I said, I'm tired of working with directors who are making choices from a place of fear.
Exactly.
Because they're second guessing what the critic's going to say, what someone else is going to say, instead of being like, what can we do that's courageous? And everybody, that made it really exciting. I mean, compared to other shows that I've done that were painfully too bright or painfully too washed out or painfully because the commands and the demands were, sorry, I just mentioned Danya and she just texted me.
And, talking about directors who make decisions based on fear, I can't tell you how many directors, you know this, you guys know this because you've been doing shows a long time, are just, I would say like maybe 20% of directors just keep with their focus on what the idea is instead of backing down, And I think in commercial theater, it's even worse because the stakes are so high to them. And to me, that's always kind of scary to me when people start backing down from ideas, because then you need to know when you basically tell the director, that's really not what we were going for.
Yeah, or you keep reminding people like what it was and how maybe you're getting off track and how, that was a terrific part of it.
Yeah, and you said that she was not afraid of shadow. I mean, it's awesome.
Loved shadow. Yeah, loved shadow.
Yeah, that's great.
One of her most consistent hopes for the lighting was more isolated.
Nice.
So you talked about that show going for like a naturalistic look. How did you achieve that?
Color temperature. Basically, daylight and sunlight. A reflected sky was the cool. Just going back to the R09 and what was my favorite? Like Lee 201 or Lee 161. And, I just keep going back to my scroller colors that I grew up with. And before we had scrollers, like how you would pick a warm and a cool, and then you would have a system that was a little cooler and a little warmer, and how you would mix that. But really, I say to students, if they say like, what should I do? If I want to be a lighting designer, I said, just open your eyes and look at what this light is here, what I'm looking at here. And I'm just really interested in the honesty of that, trying to bring that to the stage, that it feels like there was so much honesty in this piece. And because of the director, and because of the story, and it was just staged straight with that. And there was never a feeling of like, it's theater. It should be a little bigger than light. They should be a little louder. They should act a little faker. It was so rooted in, it was so dropped in so many ways. And also the set was a dream. It was a unit set that didn't, and like, who's going to do a musical there's a scene that takes place in a bedroom. They're on the hood of a car. There's a scene that takes place in a kitchen or in a home. They bring 2 chairs and a table out down center, and we keep coming back to those spaces. And there's monkey bars. There's, and the set was dark. It was lighting designer's friend. It's not always, but also I think we hit a home run with the sky too, with our sky stack. I keep saying to everybody, don't tell anybody what we did, because the sky was incredible. With the pack of, we had 2 feet, and it looks like a lot more than that. It looks like infinite.
So I have a question for you guys. You know, theater's it's hitting a lot of challenges, big challenges right now, and mostly financial. What do you guys think the future is going to be here for commercial theater and for the regional theaters?
I got to say, this one gives me great hope because the audiences are responding to something that's, you know, honest storytelling that doesn't have a lot of zhuzh and schmutz and, you know, doesn't have a lot of extra. And so that feels really great.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's troubling is the Lork theaters, what's happening in Lork.
Yeah.
And even Playwrights Horizons, who just has a big hit, Broadway hit with Stereophonic, just cut, I don't know, like 20% cut in the staff. There's, you know, they really had to cut back. And I'm like, wow, this is what happens. I don't know. That's my fear, because that's really where the real art comes from, you know, from downtown.
Right.
I think maybe that's not unfair. It comes, you know, the not-for-profits are doing more challenging stuff than the for-profit theater, because the for-profit theater is operating from a place of fear, aren't they? Like, you know, where it was one of the things that I was like tired of people saying, you know, the idea is like, we're doing this because this is what, quote unquote, what works. I was like, you know, Chorus Line, no one would have dreamt of Chorus Line as something that would work, or any of Michael Bennett shows back in our day, you know, like breaking ground and groundbreaking shows.
You're right. Like, the public has always been sort of a breeding ground for groundbreaking work, from Chorus Line to Hamilton.
Yeah. But they both, you know, they both started at the public, and they both started not-for-profits and moved. And that's kind of the formula now. And this show started, Nick and I weren't connected to it. It started in La Jolla and got a really good response there. And it just got better and better and better. And I think we've all worked on shows that went kind of backwards. And I think many times through like a sense of panic.
Interesting.
There was very little pressure from the producers, and there was so much trust from them, and so much trust kind of all around with the project. People knowing like, this is really good. But I think one of the things that worries me is attention span. Like, how long can an audience stick with something? And I gotta say, I've never seen acting like this in a musical. I've never seen the audience hang in there on a pause. Like, most of the time you do a show, it's like, come on, pick it up. You got to pick up the cues. You got to stay ahead of us. But there were so many times the audience just leaned in because of the story is so strong and the acting was so strong.
I can't wait to see it. I haven't seen it yet. I'm just dying to see it. There are a few shows this year I haven't seen that I really am dying to see. And this certainly is one of them. On a lighter note, my partner, Lori, I took her to see Book of Mormon about 2 years ago. And she heard that you were going to be on the show. And she said, ask Bryan. There must have been some wacky, crazy thing going on during that show, during the process, that he could tell on this show. So if you feel free... or if it was the most boring experience, we can just cut this whole section out. But if you have something, give it to her, okay?
Well, I'm trying to think of things like we discovered along. I mean, that was just pure joy. That was unbelievable. Like, just to be a part of that. You know, I did Urinetown some years before that. And when Urinetown closed, it's like, rats, I'm never going to do a show as funny as Urinetown. And actually, I had done a show in New York, and that's why I took the job at Maryland, because I gave up on chasing the brass ring. That, you know, if you're involved in musicals, if you get that one show, your chorus line, or you get your show, it's gonna put your kids through college and set you up. And I was like, okay, I'm not gonna do that anymore. I'm gonna teach, and I'm gonna do plays. I'm gonna, you know. And I think I was there for 6 months when I got the script for Book of Mormon. I was like, oh my God. But that was, I do remember one day in rehearsal, which was really fun. We were doing Mostly Me. It's in the beginning. It takes place at the end of it's the transition from the airport to Africa.
Right.
And the song is like, you know, we're going to do this together, but mostly me. And at one point, and Trey, a lot of time Trey and Matt were upstairs. They had their whiteboards in their team. They were working on South Park episodes while we were teching. And they couldn't believe that we were, you know, 6-8 hours in. He's like, "You're still in the opening number?" Like they would come downstairs and be like, "What the fuck?" But they came down, and while we were doing that, I just remember Trey going over to Casey and whispering to him, and they both started cracking up laughing. And that's when they had the Cunningham character drift up stage and the blackout come in front of him, and him like ducking down. That was a fun thing to witness, them discovering that.
Beautiful.
And that's every step of the way, what the cast was doing, everybody, it was just pure joy. And then the fact that it was accepted and championed by audiences, you know. Yeah, that's really lucky. Really lucky to have a hit show and both these shows that I really loved and feel like artistically, I love everything about them. And neither one of them is like playing down to an audience or thinking about the audience they're playing to. Matt and Trey could give a shit about what people think. They're there to make themselves laugh up. You know, they crack each other up.
It was obvious from the design that you had a good time doing the show. It was just obvious. And that's what I told Lori when we were watching it. I'd seen it 3 times, you know, and I was like, I just love the show. It's just so damn funny. And the design work is so good, you know, in its own cheeky way, you know. It's got this little sort of, it always has a sense of humor flowing through that, you know, everything, the costume set, you know, music, everything, lighting. And I said, you know, I bet Bryan had a fucking fun time. Now, we've had people on this show, Bryan, really famous designers who have told us how miserable the process was on certain shows that they were stuck in. And you could probably guess which ones they were. And, you know, it's so nice to be able to talk about a show that had a process of several months or years or whatever, where it was pure joy. So that's a great thing. That's a wonderful
that really
thing.
was
Cool.
Really lucky to have done that. I mean, we had some real, like, this Outsiders was really challenging for me in so many ways. And I think, you know, there was so much to do in the amount of time. And we would, you know, after the first week, Nick would show me the cue lists, and we have as many as 250 notes there, Nick, at some point. And typically what you do is like, then the next time, then you do 75 of them, and the next night you put 50 back, and then you keep whittling it down. But we were pretty far into it, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, you know. And a lot of that was requests, not from our department, but so that was pretty challenging.
I have one more question, and we're kind of running out of time.
Sure.
And that is, you are an educator, and Nick, you know, not that recently got out of school, but been through the whole process.
Nick's teaching now. I have adjuncted at NYU and Rutgers and Brooklyn College.
Oh,
actually,
great!
at
Wow.
various points.
Okay. So Nick is also an educator now. So we talk a lot about in the show because Steve and Stan are also educators, and Ellen is actually an educator. All the work she does at LDI. As educators, do you have any advice to give other educators? Because believe it or not, you know, we have a whole mixture of people who listen to our show. It's crazy how big the show is. And a big proportion is our educators. Do you have any advice for educators on how to successfully teach their lighting design students for the profession?
I know what I feel like was my wheelhouse or my strong suit. And actually, Ken Poster was in my second class that I taught. I taught at Purchase and NYU also before I went to Maryland. And that is learn how to talk, learn how to describe light, learn how to talk about light, learn metaphor, learn ways of language of light that inspire directors and teammates. Because I think that, and learn how to be brave about really expressing how you feel about things, because I think people really respond to that. And I think that in lighting, there's a lot of places to hide in gear, description of gear, and a lot of the technical stuff. But I always feel like I would keep, as a teacher, I would keep trying to pull out your personal take on the piece. How do you feel about it?
For me, on my education, I feel like I had a lot of repetition at Long Beach State. I was designing a lot. I was hanging a lot of lights. I was trial and error. We had these midnight labs that we do performances at midnight. And you would just be setting things up and trying something else. And so like repetition and trial and error as a young person, I found really valuable. And then in graduate school, it was sort of the opposite, where I was not in a theater that often at NYU. I was in a classroom, and we would be arguing, discussing plays and discussing our takes and giving push and pull with my classmates, and learning both the ability to talk about your ideas is just as important as being able to try them out. So I think probably a mixture of the two is right in the sweet spot of where you need to be. And then I would be remiss if I don't talk about being employable as an educator. You got to work about teaching your kids to be employable. And so I teach Vectorworks, and I teach assisting, and I teach 3D visualization. And so looking at things that are on the cutting edge, where if you see Unreal Engine on a resume, you're going to be like, you're on top of the latest and greatest, right? Or working in Capture, or even for free in Augment 3D, where on EOS, where you can just really find your way to pay your groceries. So those employable skills I focus on too as an educator.
What about AI? Are you moving into some of that kind of stuff, Midjourney and programs like that?
No, I don't. I haven't seen any use case for it. What I would love AI to figure out, there's a spot in the market between beacon tracking and computer vision when I just want, if I want to get to a place where I want to say, put channel 43 down center on Ponyboy, I could have a beacon on Ponyboy, but beacons have a lot of trouble with lossy data and having them get cut out, and then you might have your light go spin off into the wings and then come back when it reacquires signal. Or you have to give Ponyboy 3 beacons so that there's not lossy data. But then, I think there's a spot for someone to be working on combining beacons and cameras in a way to figure out who Ponyboy is on stage, and how to put the light on Ponyboy, where that doesn't require all this problems that come with beacons these days. So that's where I would be looking for an AI to look at our camera feeds, figure out most shows Ponyboy is standing down center, so I'm 98% sure that this is Ponyboy, even if it's a cover or a swing, that the light is going to be on Ponyboy. So I think there's space for it in lighting, but I haven't found a spot for any sort of image generators or anything like that.
I just want the day where I talk to a light board and say, I want this effect, and it just figures out how to do it, and it works, and it knows how to preset everything, and knows, no, you don't want to use that light, use this other light.
That's for me. That's why God made David Arch.
There you go.
And Nick, to say
right.
shows where I want to chase, I'll be like, okay, left to right, now try something different. I mean, for me, it's more like being a visual director and then them sorting it out. And everything Nick just said, I'm like, huh?
A pony boy?
I'm trying to think of also, I always feel like there's a danger in the technology now. Like, what's going to happen? Are the machines going to take over? And then Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to come back to try to save us. First, he's going to be a bad guy. Then he's going to be a good guy.
Let me give you a real example, Brian, of what I'm thinking about from The Outsiders. One of the things we struggled with was that, and we didn't even talk about, is that because we have rain in our show, our deck is a rain deck with drainage underneath. And so there's no spike marks in The Outsiders because there's no place to tape down a spike mark. And so our cast did their best, but we're doing little face specials or waist specials on people. And sometimes they'd be a few inches off, or sometimes a few feet off, this
sometimes.
way or that way. And with no physical way to put spike tape down on our rain deck, I would want the light to know what it's lighting rather than the pan tilt value.
Why didn't you use projected spike marks?
Because we would see them in the air because we had haze and stuff like that. But I don't know if this even relates to it. I did the last piece that Merce Cunningham did. And I was thinking the time that computer took over, because I don't know if you know about Merce Cunningham and John Cage, but they were into the chance theory of roll the dice. And that's the order of how the performers, there were 3 different musicians, and every night they would pick a card who would go first, second, and third. Even though the dance didn't change, the music would change. So I wrote 40 states, 40 cues, and always put them in an effect. The whole show is run on an effect, and you didn't know what cue you were going to. I covered the stage, but you didn't know what cue and what speed. And I would make it, the levels, it was safe kind of, but, so that was kind of amazing to see. It wasn't artificial intelligence. It really was like rolling the dice in a obsession that with an effect. The whole show is run on effects.
Yeah, well, they were really interesting. Sometimes the music had nothing to do with the movement. Anyway, John Cage could be in the men's room,
Well, John Cage is a lot just like that. That's awesome. Listen, guys, unfortunately, we're out of time. We can go on for another hour, but I see that Nick is actually melting in his apartment because he needs to get that AC turned back on again.
I thought he was chopping carrots he's making dinner for his family.
No.
It's true. I'm in New York. It's very humid, and I turned off my air conditioner to record this podcast.
You don't know this, but one of our co-hosts, Stan, he refuses to turn off his AC. And I basically just cut out most of his audio. Stan K.
Oh, okay. I know Stan K. Yeah, didn't he just retire from Florida?
Yeah, he just retired from Florida.
He's a Brooklyn boy. Yeah,
he is a Brooklyn boy. That's right. Stan, yeah. I'm a Long Island boy.
What town?
Elmont.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh my God, my dad taught there.
Oh, really?
At Elmont High School.
I only made it through elementary school there, but there you go. Hey. Guys, thank you so much for being with us today. This is just a thrill, and it's great to see Nick again. The last time Nick and I saw each other, he was my associate for a show at, where was it? BAM, right? Brooklyn Academy of Music. Was that the last time we saw each other?
Was that before or after Portland Opera, Showboat? We did a couple.
Oh, we did Showboat together. That's right. I don't know if that was before or after.
I don't remember the timeline exactly. Great to be here. Great to see you all.
It's so good to see you. And Brian, you made the right move with Mr. Nick, as you know. He is a genius.
Oh, yeah.
And he is probably the nicest person in the world. And he'll never lie. He will never lie, this guy. He's incapable of telling an untruth.
I believe that.
Yeah, he's just a good person. So thanks again, Bryan and Nick, for being on our show today. This has been a great discussion, and also congratulations on your show. And I really can't wait to see it. Hopefully, I'll be seeing it very, very soon. So take care, gentlemen, and we'll talk to you soon. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tell us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website at lighttalk.org And be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk Insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you do decide to litigate, the Snoot Group with the legal team of Sparks, Burnout, and Chase will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers and Sister, coming to you from St. Bart's, Long Beach, the Bronx, and the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
And be sure to join us next week when we talk about more lighting shenanigans and serve you a double helping of our casserole of nonsense.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye, guys. Thank you.